Hi. B-1 progress. Now, I think it was you, Bob, you noted how cluttered this table is getting out here. Inside is absolutely impossible to make a video. It is just models and parts everywhere. But this desk is starting to get a little bit cluttered too. So yes, I do need to find a home for that Vulcan and get a little bit of space here. Right. This might be the most important video for build tips on the Airfix B-1. So I'm going to go through all of them, and if there was only one video you watched on the B-1, this is probably the one. Let's start with some of the easy things. Right, I had mentioned that taking off the blank offs there in the exhaust might be an idea. I've now done that, so you can see through over there. Now that is quite a messy job, but I think it is so much better, and in all honesty Airfix should have just left it open for a modeler to do with what they want. So that was a huge bit of cleanup around the workspace, all the zillions of filings. I used the knife and a round file, a sort of a 1 centimeter round file. And you've got to be quite careful because it's quite easy to damage the inside. I managed to do it without damaging anything. And then with scraping and trimming around on the inside there, trying to be careful not to cut myself or damage the part, which I managed to do. Then I sprayed, since I was getting a gunmetal ready, my second attempt, well, not the second, it sounds like I don't do gunmetal often. I do gunmetal very often, but I don't always get it right. So I did that gunmetal, and then I had a little bit of extra, and I just started using it, extending the black line in a little bit, the gunmetal line, so that when you look in the exhaust, even though the exhaust's extended a little bit further, you will see roughly the same color as the exhaust in there. Now, if you wanted to do that next bit of detailing, instead of having that pathway through the exhaust, you could build little tubes in. I'm not going to do that. So the next question is, well, would you be able to see right through the engine from the back? And at how many angles might you be able to do that? So you'd have to see past those veins. And as you can see, there are a couple of pathways that you could see right through from there, roughly through there. You could see through. I'm sort of okay with that. It's not like everyone's going to be looking at your nacelles straight from the back. And I do regard it as quite an improvement, having it opened off the blank offs, because those blank offs are so close to the end. So I'm totally happy with that. While I was doing that, one of these centerpieces came off, which means I must have not glued it very well. One of the tips is that when you test fit this, so this is not glued onto this section, it's only glued onto the section which has that lip there, that lip that you can see. I didn't bother, so this can still move slightly, and all I really wanted to say is make sure that that seats as well as possible, and they don't seat as well as possible to start with. This one is slightly less seated, but as long as, and I don't know which one is the correct one now. So again, we'd have to make sure that we test with that. I think that's the correct one. That when your sides match and you're holding the correct pressure, that you haven't glued this with a bit too much gap on the one side so that it's forcing this open. So that would be okay there. I did say, you know, really take your time and ensure that you are happy with the way this is going to go. And if you're not, I don't mean naturally without a bit of pressure from fingers, I mean to avoid those pins, to get the pins out if you felt you needed to. So just be aware of that. These are not going to be straightforward glue jobs. In fact, again, same principle as I often refer to, one side first completely, you know, little bit by little bit, but I mean completely, only focusing on one side till it's completely dry, completely flush, you've got no step whatsoever, and then you can get to the other side and apply a little bit of pressure the one way or the other way, and you are able to put something that's not going to scratch. Find some sort of item that you can put through and apply pressure to the lower side or the upper side, if not even just your finger, but it's barely big enough for that, and gradually work the other side so that you don't get a step there. Oh yes, almost oh no, I have forgotten to bring that out. I've forgotten to bring one part out. So I was pondering, what do you put there so that when you look in the exhaust, you see something that looks like an exhaust ring? This is the 132nd Tomcat intake, not exhaust, but something that looks mildly engine-like. And I was looking through my stuff, and I didn't want to make it a big job. Briefly pondered 3D printing something, but I just wanted something quick and easy. And I looked through my parts and I found T72 wheels, 135th. And I'm sorry I didn't bring it right out now. This gunmetal is still not dry, so I left the parts there to dry. They fit in exactly into here, into that circular recess. They fit just about anywhere there, so you could position them as far back or forward. I have chosen to put them, I think it's roughly about there. And the rim pattern, the pattern that you see outside from looking at the tank side on, will be the exhaust side, looking a little bit like a burner ring. And the other side has sort of got a couple of concentric circles and could mildly pass, if you consider that you could see any part of it looking right through this way, which you won't really, but it stops. It also helps you stop seeing right through the engine. You'd still be able, even though with those two wheels there, you could still see some light, but with those tank wheels in there, they pass for doing absolute minimal, for very good sort of engine detail, and I'll show you what that looks like when they're in. If I didn't find that, I was pondering trying to cut something that looks like that, but I don't want to go overboard on this. I mean, the Airfix kit is minimally detailed on any interior area, and while it's nice to improve things slightly, there's no point going overboard when other areas are not up to scratch. So I just want something that just improves things slightly. There's the cockpit. So that's just a bit of black and a bit of silver dry brush on that center console. The seats were painted gloss grey, but then I did a light brown and then a green matte acrylic, hand painted, and then a little bit of a black dry brush just for a bit of shadow effect to look like worn seats, which is totally fine. So with minimal work, there's a cockpit that's acceptable, and I've misplaced the control columns. So for now, it doesn't have the control columns. I don't know where I put them. I put them somewhere ready for painting, and they're not here. Right, next thing, I had said that the fin fits pretty well into there, and I thought there would be no work. Well, it fit about 85% well. Now if you look at that area, that must touch flat, and it wasn't touching flat for two reasons, and that ended up being actually quite a bit of work. Nothing like the Vulcan, but still. So I then had a look at this cutout. Now this pin, this tab, is only on one side of the fin, so that means it's off center, as is the hole off center, but the hole was off center differently to this. And you could see that by the fact it was sort of pushing the fin ever so slightly, a few degrees off to the one side. And if you looked at it from the bottom, you could see that it was touching very strongly onto one side. You can see there my cut marks, and the other side had quite a gap like that. So I realized that you have to cut out and file out this slot to be a lot more closer to center. The one side of it was not close to the center line, so I extended it to be a little bit past, and I might even do a slight bit more. If you don't do that, you will have an offset fin. Only by a couple of degrees, but it's going to be annoying. That was point one. And secondly, this valley was actually not wide enough for all areas. So while the fin fit very nicely in over there, this last little bit did not. And the reason for that is that you can see that this widens here. So it goes through pretty much a straight section, and then it starts widening. And their angle, their sort of 45-degree cut, you see that 45-degree that they've done there, didn't extend correctly. So I again had to then take my knife and at 45, shaving off test fitting, shaving off test fitting, shaving off test fitting, till that fitted in perfectly, so that you then get that sort of fit there. And if I budge that, you can see that you can actually make enough change to get it to be completely flat. And I think that is correct at this point. But then checking that part of it, which fits over there. So you see how much is left of the slot. You see that little bit? So you take that over there, and this would be about over there. And it was not getting in. So if you viewed that like this, it was not getting in there, and I had to shave both the inside carefully, shaving on the inside lip of that to widen that slightly, and also shaving this quite wide part, shaving that a bit in till you now got a fit there. That of course still leaves you with the fact that when this is finally glued onto there, you may still have a little bit of a problem, but at least I've got the best fit possible with that part, and that section of the fin. The fin is now glued as well, very, very well. No steps, everything perfectly flat there to make sure that we again don't have any tilt of the fin once it's glued in. But did have a little bit of a engineering failure. Now, you'll remember that when I first spoke about putting in that steel rod, which you can see there, that thin steel rod, which is possibly just under a millimeter, 0.8 millimeter steel maybe, on the inside of that very difficult drilling. The issue was ensuring that a bump on the horizontal stabilizer would not just break these plastic pins off. because they were obviously the weakest point. I hadn't yet been thinking about the tilt and the fact that this would then just droop, and then decided to put in that section on the inside. But what I did fail to take into account, or didn't recognize at that stage, is that with the horizontal stabilizers on and with that restrictive mechanism that I've built in, with the restriction and the horizontal stabilizer on a tube, you've got the horizontal stabilizer on the square part around the tube, and this part resisting it so that you can push it down and it'll push back, push down, push back. But the amount of grip that it has on that very thin steel rod was now exceeded. So while the mechanism works, what happens is the horizontal stabilizer is just sliding on the shaft a little bit. So it keeps it steady, but instead of having this bounce back mechanism, it's now sort of at the point where it can just do that. I hadn't super glued it in, and it wasn't going to be possible to super glue that in because that steel rod was a very tight and tricky fit to get in, and took more seconds, probably close to 30 seconds maybe, than what super glue takes to dry when it's in a very tight area. I don't know if you've ever done that. Super glue can take quite a long time to dry when it's got a lot of air around it, but if you put it into a confined space, especially like a shaft going into another shaft, it glues almost instantly. So I wasn't going to put super glue onto the inside there. The last thing I wanted was the steel shaft going less than halfway in and then it's glued, and I can't achieve the goal. So what happens is this square part of the plastic simply just is sliding over the rod. So what is the correct method that one should actually use if you want to recreate this mechanism that I've done and allow for moving horizontal stabilizers as opposed to just gluing them in a fixed position? You get that brass railway stuff, commonly used for railway, at the model shop where you get all the plastics and the evergreen sheets and that, they've almost always got the brass rods, copper rods, steel rods, things like that. And there's almost always square brass rod as well. So rather than having a piece of very delicate square plastic over a steel shaft, one could have replaced that whole section going through that drum with a square brass piece. That would have given way more torsional rigidity and probably the required amount of resistance against bending. And to be honest, you could have even fitted a steel rod inside the brass tube. I think, I'm not sure if I've seen brass solid, but brass tube, square brass tube certainly. So my system is adequate for a model where the horizontal stabilizers can move and can be adjusted back and hold position, but they're not going to create that nice bounce back mechanism which I demonstrated. And that's quite nice. It's always nice to do a little bit of engineering and then find out where the weakest point was and where it was going to fail and how you could have improved upon that in the next edition if you were going to do that. So still completely successful, just missing that bounce back mechanism. So fin is done. Was there any hassle? The only thing I could say is I glued this is with tube glue. I put on one side there and I ignored that. I ignored that side so that I've got less to pay attention to while I position that and ensure that that's flat. Make sure it's gluing correctly, check that that's flat. Does take a while if you want a very nice the two parts are on each other without a shift forward or backwards on the leading edge and trailing edge, without a vertical shift, making sure that you get this perfect. So luckily that all worked, and then I just take the super thin and glue that part lastly, so that's very easy. So that's ready. And then the next big modification was, after thinking about it and that connecting piece, and that if I glue the wing, I need the connecting piece in, and therefore when you glue the second wing, you now have two wings with this connecting piece in. I just knew that was never going to stand up to the amount of handling and modeling that I want to be doing on the wings afterwards. Weathering, doesn't matter how, even the sanding of the edges and all that sort of thing. And I thought about it again, and I thought, despite me saying that pin which they provided there initially, better just leave that alone. To be honest, there was no reason not to just drill that out, which I have now done. Took my round file, got it to the correct point, and then this is not stretch sprue. I just looked through my collection of sprue to look for something that's the correct, actually this one's a little bit too thick, I didn't bring the correct one here. Look for something that's correct, and that later on, once your wings are painted and you're just about to mount them into the fuselage, you can then put that cross piece in, and you can even strengthen up that cross piece. I think I'm actually going to do that. And then just put these two pins in and glue them, and it'll actually be perfect. There's no reason not to do that. So that allows me now to focus on just the two wing halves without anything detracting from trying to get that right. And I think they're going to be a fairly easy one. In fact, that's probably the task for tonight. So the gunmetal's still drying, wings are ready to be done, and the last thing that I wanted to talk about, since it's just about coming up to sort of major assembly time. Oh, I did sand that piece well enough, and I got that all. I just need to do the fine sanding, but that the bay doors are in. I did do a fair bit of scraping and test fitting and scraping and test fitting. It's not just a quick glue. That if you want a nice smooth one, you do need to give a bit of attention there. Actually, I will say that on the Airfix kit, everything that you do needs to be done with a lot of test fit, adjust, file, sand, test fit many times to ensure that you've got the best result. The last thing that I would say is on this canopy, and this is common of many Airfix canopies from the early stuff up till I guess even current, the raised part of the bars, the canopy bars are quite raised. And as I just showed you the other day on the Winnie May, while masking is pretty easy on this, that amount of raised bar does allow for a bit of an imperfect final finish. So the question is, do I sand this entire canopy so that the bars are very minimal, hardly raised above there? And I'm thinking that would be the right way to go. Will I lose some of that glossiness? Might I damage this? This is somewhat of a rigid piece, but I mean, there's always a chance that I put just the wrong amount of pressure on it. Or do we just mask, just spray, just try and do it well and go with it? Give your opinions on that canopy. My personal view, it probably isn't worth the somewhat long amount of sanding and checking and then buffing the canopy back to gloss. So I guess the best is just mask and spray. I still need to clean this up and test fit it onto that front section. But overall, the thing is reducing in the number of remaining tasks. The other thing, as I have said, is still those veins, and I hope they fit easily and go in easily. I hope I don't need to widen any of those slots. By the way, the one thing I did forget to mention is, I remember I said that on one of the nacelles, the slot for this was not wide enough. And that wasn't because the slot wasn't wide enough. It was because these two centerpieces were not molded equally thick. One of them was thicker, one of them is thinner. The slots in the nacelle part were molded equally, but getting the centerpieces in was not equal. So we are getting there, and then of course, once I've got the bulk of the airframe together, I need to just get a little bit of a mental picture around the nature of my spray jobs and weathering and how we want to treat this one. This of course is, as I have said, a very, very uninspiring box art. But it can make a very nice scheme. I must just go and Google a whole bunch of very nice pictures of the B-1 in the scheme that I choose, and start getting that mental picture of what process I would like to go through to make it look very good looking, a little bit weathered, maybe medium to heavily weathered. Give your thoughts. Would you like to see this B-1 lightly weathered, medium weathered, heavily weathered? Keeping in mind that the second B-1, the monogram B-1, will be in the grey scheme and will be somewhat good looking, probably lightly weathered. So we could do a heavily weathered on this one. It is a possibility. Okay, happy modeling everyone. Cheers.